As a political pundit, I always said that as goes Pasco County, so goes the state of Florida. Kurt, I don't know if that happened this last presidential election, but it is a joy to be in Pasco County. It is a spectacular place, full of diversity. It really reflects, I think, in many ways, the rich diversity of our state, the greatness of our state. Mr. President, thank you for that over-the-top introduction. My mother would have been really proud of you. I thought I would start maybe with a quick Bush family update, because I get asked a lot. At the dinner tonight, I was asked a lot about how the family's doing. And first, I want to thank everybody on this blessed Ash Wednesday for the thoughts and prayers for my dad. He was in the hospital for way too long. Some of you may have read about it by a criminal hacking procedure that ended up getting information from AOL.com from my sister, so didn't get that. Don't go online now and try to find it. But if you did, you know that we were really worried about it. But I think prayer, the power of prayer, works. And he's out of the hospital. And as he said, put the harps away, put them back in the closet. And that's exactly where they are. He's back at home, which is the great news for the Bush family. That is always the case in life. You always have good news, and there's always kind of a countervailing set of bad news factors as well. And the bad news for him is that he has a new caregiver, Barbara Bush, and she's not as fawning as the great nurses and caregivers at Methodist Hospital. So he's going to have to start behaving a little bit better, and he is. So that's good. My mom is doing well, thank God. Some of you have asked about my brother. He's not in the news these days. He has kept a very low profile. I'm so glad you asked. Marvin is doing fantastic. Thank you. Seriously, my brother George and Laura have done something that I think is a pretty noble tradition in American politics. Occasionally there's a 15-yard penalty and loss it down in this regard, but most of the time former presidents keep their mouths shut and allow current presidents to do their job. I can't imagine, but it's got to be a little frustrating to be a president trying to struggle with the challenges that any president has, to have the formers out there chirping on the sidelines. And my brother, I think, has maintained this tradition, and it is a noble one. As a brother of a former president, who I love a lot, I admire his incredible fortitude to keep his mouth shut. I try hard to keep my mouth shut. I don't have the discipline completely that he has. But he's doing well. He and Laura are working on poverty issues as they did when he was president and first lady, poverty issues in Africa. The Bush Institute is focused on education issues here in this country, and the Bush Library will be open for business in April of this year in Dallas. So if you ever get to Dallas, I hope you have a chance to go look at it. The other good news in the George W. Bush family is that Jenna, the rambunctious twin, is, you may see her on the Today Show occasionally. Jenna is pregnant with a boy, so that's the first grandchild for 43. And that brings great joy to George and to Laura. I think George secretly was hoping that Jenna would have twins so that she could get a little of her own medicine, but that didn't work out. My son, George P., and Mandy are going to have a child as well, my second grandchild, so I'm totally blessed in that regard. And George is thinking about getting into what I never thought was the family business, but now we're into the fourth generation, so maybe the pundits were right. I don't know what got into him on that. Lynn and I are proud of him, but we're not taking responsibility for this urge to run for office, but he's doing it, and I'm pretty excited about that. And then I got to tell you, the joy of my life is Georgia Helena Walker Bush. Got to get the initials for some of you who haven't followed presidential lore. Those are the initials of her great-grandfather, GHWB. She is the joy of my life. She's 18 months old, and I don't know, for any grandparents here? You guys, there are a few grandparents in Pasco County, I remember. It's interesting. You bring up three kids, all the trials and tribulations of doing what moms and dads are supposed to do. Is the greatest joy, I think, that anybody will ever have, is to have that joy. But it isn't easy. It's a challenge all the way. You get through the whole thing, and then your child or child-in-law has a baby, and you have to go through a training program to be able to be with the granddaughter. Have you noticed this? It's quite odd. Maybe I should go back to St. Leo, and maybe there's a certificate class or something so I can celebrate this. But occasionally we get to be with Georgia by ourselves, and I have to admit her nickname is 41. And she's the joy of my life. One other thing about Georgia. Georgia is, let's see if I get this right. Georgia is a Iraqi, Canadian, Texan, Mexican, American. So she's quadra-hyphenated, I guess. Sandra her parents are from Iraq. She was born in Canada. My son Jeb is obviously American, but his mom is from Mexico. And so all of these hyphens, when the census comes 20 years from now, you have to fill it out. Georgia will be part of a new America, which will say not applicable. And I think that's a pretty darn good idea, by the way. All this identity politics is getting a little old. One quick tribute to St. Leo University. I don't know if you all follow what goes on in policy world, but universities in general have been really stressed out recently. They've reached kind of the limits of their ability to charge tuition at rates far faster than inflation. I mean, incredible tuition inflation, financed in a lot of ways by student loans that have grown geometrically. The student loans outstanding in the United States now is over $1 trillion. Could be the next bubble that we've created without a big debate. Endowments are down. Tuition can't go up any faster. Operating costs, administrative costs in many public universities and other universities have grown extraordinarily fast. The walls have closed in on universities, and St. Leo has really kind of figured this out before the crisis. So I want to pay tribute to the management team of this incredible university to anticipate the challenges, to create strategies to be able to avoid the challenges so students can flourish here at this great university, and create a business model that now is the envy of higher education in the United States. I don't know if you know that, but that's the simple fact. You should be very proud to be part of this community. So, Mr. President, the idea that I would come here to talk about change and managing change is a little embarrassing in my regard, because you should be giving that speech, because you've done an extraordinary job. So, I'm a former, been gone now from had the best job in the world, literally by far and away the best job that I've ever could imagine, being governor of my beloved state, our beloved state of Florida. I've been gone now for 6 or 7 years, so I'm really a former. And the further I get away from that, the more liberated I am to be able to speak my mind. And it's great. I enjoy it a lot. And I'm delighted to be here to talk about something that I think is really essential for the United States to regain its footing, for us to restore our greatness, because that's at risk right now. The election is over. For many of us that watch it with our peripheral vision, I started watching ESPN about halfway through, because it seemed saner to see how my University of Miami was doing. By the way, University of Miami, the spectacular basketball team, lost to St. Leo. That is amazing. So the election's over. $4 billion was spent in an election where there was no change. The president was reelected, the Senate remained in Democratic hands, and the House remained in Republican hands. There were small changes, but in essence, after spending $4 billion in a fairly contested race, certainly heated by normal standards, it was, people were watching. And as the song goes, meet the new boss, same as the old boss. And so now what? We've gone through this entire process. We have the exact same thing we had. People are increasingly worried about the inability of Washington to get along or to try to create a consensus to deal with the growing structural problems that we face, that we know we face. We know we have these problems. It's not a debate anymore. At least most people don't believe that everything is going well for our country, and that Washington is the source of part of the problem, and it's certainly a source for much of the solution. And so, where do we go from here? We have a recovery that's the weakest in modern times, the most tepid recovery. In fact, people now talk about the new normal being 1.5% growth, which is not a sustainable rate if you're a young person. I can guarantee you that. That will not create opportunities for people that are equipped to be able to be successful in life. Our entitlement situation is unsustainable. Let me try a test here. Let's assume that everybody in the room here will be 10 years old or 10 years from now. Who's with me on that? I will be 70, and I will be a profile of the new American, if you will, that will be receiving benefits in ever-increasing numbers in an unsustainable way. And yet we know these problems exist, but we seem to be unable to deal with the unsustainable entitlement problems. Our regulations are really modeled after the mid-20th century. It was a pretty good century, and the regulations in 1975 and the 1975 world were really good. But not changing those regulations, in fact, adding on top of those regulations, has taken away much of the animal spirits and the dynamism that exists in people's pursuit of their own dreams. Rather than moving to a 21st century set of rules and regulations, we've in effect added more complexity on top of outdated means of regulation. Our education system does not help young people become successful to the extent that it needs to, increasingly so as we move into a knowledge-based economy completely. And we're not delivering the kind of success that we need to be able to sustain our quality of life. Our debt levels are high and rising. Our tax policy is convoluted, to be polite about it. It punishes success and savings. Our social and economic mobility is stalled. In fact, the United States, once the envy of the world in terms of our ability to say to people, if you start at the lowest rung of the economic ladder and you work hard and you show determination and you play by the rules and you work hard again and you show determination, that you can be anything you want to be. That was the American story. In fact, it continues to be the American story, but the reality is that the United States today is the least socially mobile and economically mobile country in the developed world. It is a tragedy that we don't have a sense of outrage about that, because all the other things that need to be fixed would solve that problem as well. We're changing who we are as a nation by complacently accepting the new normals, and we're going to make it increasingly hard for the graduates of this great university, irrespective of their age or where they are in life, to be able to pursue their dreams, because we've not been able to move to the better way, the better place to be able to create a better America. So, no wonder people are pessimistic. Sometimes I even get pessimistic about this. No wonder people are anxious. They're very anxious. No wonder people think we're on the wrong track consistently in our country. So what should we do? My personal opinion is we need to create a bipartisan, wherever possible, path to high, sustained growth, and we desperately need to make sure that we assure that everybody has a chance to benefit from high, sustained growth. And then we demand, in every way possible, public leadership, starting with our president, but certainly not ending there, public leadership to be able to transform these things so that our country can restore its greatness. High growth creates more revenue for people and government than any tax increase ever devised. It's exponentially better in that regard. Low growth, on the other hand, or no growth, does the opposite. It shrinks revenue collection and increases demands on government. That sounds so simple, but in fact, if you think about the last 2 years, about the conversation in politics, very little of it relates to this very basic fact. If you could create strategies for high sustained growth, many of the demands that are placed on government would subside, and revenue collected for government to deal with our huge deficit problems would be able to lessen the deficit in short order. Think of the demands placed on government when people are out of work. You have unemployment compensation, food stamps, Medicaid, and many other things during periods of slow growth. And in high growth, think about the avoidance of those expenses. And let me put it in perspective. The president's OMB has, every year when they submit their budget, they make a projection of what growth does in terms of the budget deficit. And this last year, when they submitted their budget, they suggested that over a 10-year period, if the economy grew by 1/10 of 1% more, over 10 years. Just 1/10 of 1% more, that you would reduce the budget deficit over that 10-year period by $574 billion. Now, I know trillions and billions start getting like so big it doesn't seem like a big deal anymore. That's a lot of money for 1/10 of 1% extra growth. The power of compounding is our friend when we use it to create economic growth. I was sitting on a tarmac in O'Hare Airport, something that I do not recommend to anybody in this wonderful crowd. Stay in Pasco County, particularly in the winter. So I'm sitting there, it's like a 2-hour delay, and I have a monkey brain. It's impossible for me to like stay put, start reading a book, kind of move off that, and I figure I'm going to try to do something. I'm going to start preparing for the speechifying part of my life. So I take $16 trillion at the time, that was our GDP, and I go 1.02 times 1.02 times 1.02, do it 10 times. The point being, if we increased our economic activity by 2% more than the new normal, we would get $4 trillion of extra economic activity in the 10th year. That is bigger than the gross domestic product of Germany. So tomorrow, this university is focused on how do we create a sustainable world. My personal belief is that we need to change the talk about sustainability. In order to create sustainability, we have to have higher growth, because that creates the opportunities to invest in the things that create sustainability. Think about Florida in the last 6 years with the economic downturn. This state led the nation in land preservation. Pristine, wild Florida is millions of acres have been purchased over the long haul in the state because we had a growing economy that generated revenue for us to invest in the long-term things. Those land buying programs are gone during downturns. And I hope they come back, because that is a conservative value to protect the beauty of our state. But that doesn't happen unless you have high sustained growth. That 2% extra growth exponentially creates more revenue. About $1 trillion of recurring money every year by the 10th year. $1 trillion without a tax increase. So it seems to me we should put aside some of our partisan divide. I know there are Republicans here and Democrats, but just for a moment, let's play like we're all nonpartisan, or whatever you want to call us, and say, do we think that high sustained growth is better than no growth at all? If we start with that premise, generally people embrace that idea. So what would we do to create a change in policy? Because clearly the policies we have today are not going to allow us to grow at that kind of rate. What are the kinds of things that we could do to be able to enhance the growth of the country, to lift our spirits, to regain our footing, and to allow for more upward mobility at a time when we're becoming ossified and stratified and way too complacent as a nation? My suggestion to you is that we would need a patriotic energy policy based on American innovation, American resources, and North American energy sources. An immigration policy that is true to our heritage, that would be refocus immigration to sustain economic growth, to create a catalytic converter, to re-energize our country, to repopulate the demographic base so that old fogies like me can live lives when we get 10 years older, that we can consider maybe retiring, and to assure that 10 years younger people can have a chance to get a retirement benefit that they put money into. And then thirdly, a transformed education system so that more than just a third of our children go through the K-12 system at the end of it where they're college and or career ready. Those three things, which aren't particularly partisan in my mind, they're not particularly ideological, have a chance to get beyond the food fight that goes on in Washington, D.C. If people put aside some of the orthodoxies of their beliefs, and would be the foundation for a new economic rebirth in our country. So let's start with energy. The United States is perhaps the most energy resource country in the world. We have more BTUs of coal than Saudi Arabia has energy units of oil. We have incredible resources of natural gas found because of American innovation that has revolutionized much of the energy sector. We have, for the source of innovation for renewables and for conservation, not just in this country, but around the world. Yet last year, $300 billion went out of our country without any economic benefit. Much of this goes to countries, if you take out North America, you take out Mexico and Canada, much of this money goes to countries that hate us now. You can list those, or are unstable and could learn to hate us in a heartbeat if they had a change in regime. This is a magnet policy if you think about it. $300 million, no economic activity attached to it. Just a wire transfer, out to some bank in some far-off land that's used then to either pay for our debt, sadly, because we have huge deficits, or to invest in their future of their country. It seems to me if we wanted to create a rebirth of our own country, that we would recognize that the economic benefit of investing in the infrastructure to produce energy in North America would create far more economic value than the wire transfer out with no economic value at all. The greatest news that has happened since the commercialization of the internet is that the United States has the potential in the very near term to become the largest producer of oil and gas in the world. The most transformative innovation since the internet was commercialized is taking two existing technologies that have been around a long time, hydraulic fracking and horizontal drilling, and applying them together in new ways to create a rebirth of the natural gas industry in our country. It wasn't that long ago, 15 years ago, that companies invested billions of dollars to create import facilities, terminals, to bring liquefied natural gas into our own country. Now those facilities are going to be used perhaps to export gas that will be liquefied here and exported to other countries. Dynamism works. Innovation works. Thinking that the static world will always be static is always a flaw in people's judgment. This revolution has the potential of changing the dynamics of where we are as a nation. By the way, the guy who applied these two existing technologies, he's a Texan. Let's see what hyphens he has. He's a Greek-American Texan named George Mitchell. Greek immigrant who came to this country in pursuit of his own dreams. He took this big risk, and Mitchell Energy was the company that embraced this idea. He sold his business. He's a billionaire. He's 93 years old. He's living large. And he built a city called the Woodlands. Have you ever been to Houston? This is the America that we hold up high as examples of what can be. And this is what we should embrace. We should embrace the dreamers that invest in their own dreams. Sometimes they succeed and sometimes they don't. In this case, it was a game changer that we now need to create a strategy around. So what should we do? The benefits of this, by the way, are not just the ones that are apparent. The first thing, the greatest benefit, is the potential to reindustrialize our country. Dow Chemical has made a commitment to invest billions of dollars back in the United States for the first time in a generation, because we have the lowest cost of natural gas in the world. So reindustrializing the heartland of our country and creating manufacturing opportunities in our beloved state of Florida is now possible because we're incredibly competitive because of energy. It will lessen greenhouse gas emissions as more power is generated with natural gas, supplanting coal. It will save consumers billions of dollars on their utility bills, which has already happened in Florida, and it will continue to happen as we have the lowest cost feedstock of the world. We will benefit as consumers. It will create hundreds of thousands of high-wage jobs and hundreds of billions of dollars of investment in our own country while lessening the balance of payments, that $300 billion number, and diminishing the need, by the way, to have a large footprint in the traditional sense of military around the world in these far-off lands. That will diminish as we become more energy secure, an added benefit that will save us enormous amounts of money, and more importantly, not put the lives of brave men and women at risk for other countries. So what should we do? My personal opinion is the President ought to sign the XL pipeline, the Keystone Pipeline, 6 months ago. We ought to begin this integration of North America's energy sources in a way. The idea that somehow this is a bad idea, let's assume for the moment the President decides against this. He will have created a higher carbon footprint experience by not approving this, because what will happen is the Canadians will turn the pipeline west. and they'll go to a port on the West Coast, and they'll send it to places like China that have a much heavier carbon footprint in their industrial base. This is foolish not to be able to take advantage of it. Canada is perhaps our most important ally. Perhaps Mexico and Canada, I would say, are the two most important allies. Put yourself in their shoes. I wonder what they think about the United States, that this is a hard decision to make, that creates economic benefits for us. It's a hard thing to imagine why this is a difficult decision. Rational regulation of fracking to make sure it's done responsibly and to assure that the regulation that may be imposed later is not so onerous. To create a best practices, if you will, in the 21st century so that the environmental impacts of this are dealt with in a thoughtful way to sustain the industry would be a second suggestion. We have seen a 50% reduction in permits granted on federal lands and federal waters. And for us to create this strategy, it seems, in a thoughtful way, that should be expanded over time. We should help Mexico modernize its oil sector. The President of Mexico has embraced the third rail of Mexico politics by saying that there needs to be foreign investment and foreign technology brought to the oil sector of Mexico. There's huge opportunities there. Pemex is a complete disaster. The United States could be a great partner in increasing capacity and production in Mexico that furthers our stability economically. We should find incentives to use natural gas for transportation. If today we had every freight truck used on our highways to take goods around the country, if they were powered by natural gas, we would save 1.5 million barrels per day of crude oil. Again, moving towards this energy security strategy, creating huge economic opportunities, because that, by the way, that natural gas fueling those trucks would reduce transportation costs for goods and services dramatically. We should continue to consume less. A bipartisan solution should include conservation. In fact, the cheapest energy we can get is the energy we don't use. And there's a place where there could be common ground between left and right to be able to make a comprehensive approach. You would have to include things that might be important for others that don't consider production of oil and gas to be that important. That's okay. In fact, I think it's wonderful that we could actually find common ground to bring consensus to something that is of such importance for our country. And then finally, I would suggest we shouldn't let market forces decide what is invested in and how it's invested. We should not resort to the greatest oxymoron in politics today, government-sponsored venture capital. It doesn't work. In Florida, we've tried mini-me versions of this in some ways, and it didn't work really well there. The big ways of doing it that have occurred in Washington through the stimulus monies have been abject failures. Better to use the money that may come from the federal government to provide basic research and development and applied research and development to create the next innovations, the next disruptions. But let market forces decide the winners and losers. Don't let the government, through a top-down driven way, make that happen, because it'll never work. A real energy strategy would get us, in my opinion, at least an additional 1% economic growth. Talking about sustainability. The advantage of that would be trillions of dollars over a 10-year period of additional economic activity. National security would be stronger, and the jobs that would be created would be certainly higher, and we'd get much more revenue from government at every level than the current approach of trying to redistribute wealth to solve the problems of people that are desperately needing opportunity. The second thing I tell you is that demography is destiny. An aging population with fewer workers means lower growth. It's inevitable. It is just a simple demographic fact. You cannot turn back. These are like the laws of gravity, or the laws of the Lord. These are absolutes. These are things that are not negotiable. And in that fact, we have to find a way to rebuild the demographic pyramid that allows us to constantly renew ourselves as a nation. Look at the rest of the world. Slow-growing, developing countries have had, all of them have had decades of low fertility rates. Japan, in the near future, will begin to see a declining population. So will Russia. And much of Europe is on the path of a similar kind of situation. China, with an incredible demographic challenge, is on its way to do the same. China has, amongst young people, has 25% more men than women because of the one one-child policy, which is a complete disaster that a society of that scale has never experienced. 25% more men than women. Women are given opportunities economically now that they never had just a generation ago, so they're deferring marriage. China's economic progress is allowing for the aging of the population to take place, which is fantastic. And China has a middle kingdom mentality where different races are viewed more as a threat than as an opportunity. So the national identity is not embracing the diversity of its population. And so to envision China importing workers is difficult to imagine. So all of the world that we talk about economically has huge demographic challenges. No country can do immigration like the United States has done in the past. Our national identity is based on shared values, not race or some exclusionary belief. Historically, at least in our country, and many of you have shared this experience, or your parents have, or your grandparents have, it's what unites us ultimately, other than Native Americans, it's what unites us as Americans is the unwritten contract that comes with immigration. You come to our country, you embrace a set of common values, you learn English, and you become as American as anyone that was born here. That is the wonder of the United States. And in a time when this huge advantage could be put to use to create sustained economic growth, we have allowed politics to be mired in ugly politics. Immigrants are an engine of economic vitality. They make things happen. And in a country starved for economic growth, we need more people making things happen. The number of businesses started by native-born Americans declined between 1996 and 2011. The business startup rate among immigrants soared by 50%. In 1999, American-born scientists were granted 90,000 patents compared to 70,000 granted to scientists that were in the United States born in other countries. By 2009, 10 years later, more patents were granted to foreign-born scientists, 96,000, than to Americans, 93,000. Both parties are to blame for this dynamic that exists. Republicans seem to view the politics of immigration, I'm going to temper this because Adam Smith's here and I don't want to read about it in the Tampa Times. I'm going to read about it, but I'm going to temper what I completely think. So Adam, you can edit as you see fit. Republicans view this issue as, in many cases, not so much in Florida, but in other states, and then it gets national attention, they view it as a way to win primaries because people are frustrated by the lack of rule of law. The lack of control of borders should be something that's a given. Great countries can control their borders over and out. There shouldn't be a debate about it, but sadly in our country we've been lax and people are angry about that, legitimately so. But they show their anger and frustration to be kind of the strongest. There's a Spanish expression, any of you from South Florida or Tampa, you'll know this, que el hombre quiere ser el último huevo duro del picnic. The guy wants to be the last hard-boiled egg of the picnic. So in politics, you want to be stronger than Tarzan's mother is another great human expression. And that's what the politics of immigration was, to show how strong you are about one element of immigration. And the Democrats have a different strategy, and that is, let the Republicans say what they want to say and we'll win general elections. So if nothing happens, those on the right get kind of what they want, but not winning general elections, and those on the left get what they want, which is to win general elections. It's a tragedy because this has the opportunity to be a catalytic converter for sustained economic growth in our country. And so what should we do? The other analogy I'd say is like Monty Python. You know, the Dark Knight, he's on the log, and he gets whacked, his torso goes up, one arm goes off, the other arm goes, and then his legs go off, and it's just a flesh wound. You know, we fight this political fight thinking that there's some value to it, and stubbornly say that we're still fighting and it makes sense, but in fact, the country is changing and we're missing this huge opportunity for sustained economic growth. So what should we do? First, we need to reform our immigration laws in a comprehensive way, because this is complex, this is not a simple thing to do, based on this dynamic, the core values that immigration has been and will continue to be essential for our success as a nation, and that policy must be grounded in the rule of law. The two pillars of comprehensive immigration reform must take both of those considerations into account, not just one of them. Second, we need to continue to improve border security, which has improved over the last decade of time. There's been major investments on the border. And we need to track down the thousands of people who stay beyond their expiration of their visas. 40% of the unauthorized people in our country came legally. They came with a visa that allowed them to stay temporarily, and we didn't have the ability to know where they were, and so they've stayed. 40%, they're not crossing over 100%. 40% are coming through our ports of entry legally. Getting and staying here illegally should be harder than coming and staying illegally. I know that sounds like a crazy idea, but it's possible if we can put our minds to it and create the resources around it, we can solve that problem. I personally believe that there should be increased state and local law enforcement to work in partnership with the federal government to do that. Florida was the first state in the country to create a partnership to train FDLE agents and sheriff's departments across the state to be the eyes and ears of the Border Patrol that was completely understaffed at the beginning of this arrangement. And that creating this network of law enforcement is a way to enhance security. We should use E-Verify for companies so that they have certainty that when they hire somebody, they know that this person is here legally. That is not the most complex thing that America has done, trust me, to be able to create a database, to be able to identify if someone is here legally. And so if you create that better certainty on border security and enforcing the law, then the next steps ought to be a work-based visa system that is based on need. Graduates of STEM fields, where there's huge shortages in our country today, should stay if they have a job or start a business. We need only to look to the north, our neighbors in Canada, most of whom are in Florida these next 2 months. You can check them out. They're amongst us tonight, probably. Ask them how Canada has dealt with this immigration strategy, and what you'll find is that in Canada, 75% of the legal immigrants that come for economic purposes, and only 13% come for family reunification purposes. And in the United States, it has flipped the exact opposite. In fact, we're the only country that has 70+% of its legal immigrants coming for family reunification. And that makes it harder for us to develop an economic strategy that allows people in the STEM fields, people that have skills that can immediately be brought to bear for economic activity. H-1B visas should be expanded, and a path to residency for them made easier. Today there are 1 million people that have H-1B visas, but we have a quota system that is at a maximum something like 140,000 green cards administered over a year. That's the maximum. And the visa for H-1B lasts either 3 or 5 years. So you do the math, and students will figure this out. Some of us older folks, this math may be a little abstract and complex. I guarantee you that at least half of the people that have H-1B visas will have to go back. Now there's a brilliant idea. Let's take these highly skilled people that are adding value to Americans' economic might, that make us technologically proficient, train them, and then send them back to far-off lands so they can compete against us. Brilliant! That's exactly what we do by not having the ability to find common ground and build on this consensus to turn immigration into something positive rather than a political fight. We need a guest worker program based on economic need to sustain industries like tourism and agriculture. There are 3 million jobs that are unfilled with skilled labor in our country today, which is a huge American tragedy. And there are thousands and thousands of jobs that could be filled temporarily based on need and demand that will never be filled by Americans, that could be filled by people that want to come, make a wage to be able to provide for their family back home. With better technology and more sophisticated enforcement, and with the lessons learned of 9/11, we could expand thoughtfully, but I think dramatically, the number of tourist visas that we give out. We need to know where these folks are, of course, but the simple fact is that Florida gets something like 90 million visitors a year. It is why we don't have an income tax for us Floridians that are happy about that. If you do, many of these smart people that would be given a tourist visa would come to our beloved state to spend money in our restaurants and our hotels and our beaches and take advantage of the beauty of the place. It would be selfishly a thing that Floridians should be hopefully strongly for, and I believe that it's possible to do that. And for the millions who are here illegally, in an undocumented way, living in the shadows, there needs to be a path to legal status achieved by paying a fine, learning English, not violating the laws over an extended period of time. To me, and I'm here in this great Catholic institution, and this is what my church teaches me, it is completely un-American to require people living in the shadows. That is not a life of dignity. This is a better country. So, strategy based on our own resources and the incredible innovation that exists in our country, an immigration strategy that moves, that's based on our noble traditions of being an immigrant country that moves towards an economic imperative. Those two things would get us to sustained economic growth at 2%, extra than what we have today. But is it sustainable? Is it sustainable? I would say it isn't unless we build capacity in the next generation in a far better way than we're doing today. Today in America, the simple fact is that a third of our children, after we spend more per student than any country in the world, people don't believe that, but that is the God's honest truth, 1/3 of our children are college and or career ready, if we were honest with ourselves. If we had standards that were benchmarked to the best in the world, 1/3 of our children would be college and or career ready at the end of their 12-year experience. Now, I don't know about you, but if we accept that as the new normal, then we're doomed. We're doomed as a nation. 1/3 of our kids think they have something of value because they get a diploma that says, I graduated from high school, and that piece of paper allows them to then do remedial work in community college, and allows them maybe to fill out a form to get a job, but they won't be qualified for the job. Now you tell me who's fooling who if we have a system that we feel so darn good, that our system is so good, that 1/3 of our kids really have the power of knowledge, 1/3 think they have, and their hearts are broken when they find out they don't, and 1/3 don't make it at all. That's what we have in America today, and if you remember anything about this speech, it is time for us to shake off the complacency that exists in this country before it's too late. Economic competitiveness in this world has radically changed, exponentially changed, and our country can no longer be complacent about this. Thankfully, Florida is one of the states that has begun to challenge the old order of things. Thankfully, we've made progress, but we've got a long way to go here, and we certainly have a long way to go every place else. Because here in Florida and around the country, you still hear the same excuses, all sorts of excuses, if you listen carefully. Some of them are hard to say in the public square because they're not so subtle in what the implications are. But you hear that parents aren't involved. You hear that kids living in poverty shouldn't be held to the same standards of kids living in affluence. You hear that the system is not at fault. It's family-like that makes it difficult. That poverty makes it difficult. And on and on and on it goes. Excuse, excuse, excuse it goes. And the net result is, whether there are conditions that are different for children, and they certainly are, does not change the fact that God has given the ability of every child to learn, and it's up to all of us, not just the teachers in the classroom, or those that administer our school districts, or those in the business. All of us need to see this as a moral imperative to give the chance for every child to have their God-given abilities flourish. And we're not doing that in our country today. So in Florida, we raised standards. We had, I'm not kidding, accountability. My dad would probably call it eat your broccoli accountability. We had the most ambitious school choice programs, and we saw significant improvement. We focused on early childhood literacy. We rewarded improvement and success, and we differentiated that between mediocrity and failure. And Florida actually moved the needle in significant ways. Florida on the NAEP test, the Nation's Report Card test, went from 29th out of 31 in the 4th grade reading test to 10 years later in 2007 to 6th in the country out of 50 states that took the test. Florida's African American kids did better than in that 2007 test than 5 of the states. I won't say which ones they were. Florida's Hispanic kids did better than or equal to 33 states. Florida's low-income Hispanic kids on the 4th grade reading test did better than the California average. Florida's ESE kids, exceptional education kids, do better than every state in the country in terms of their learning gains. And we're in the top 5 on limited English proficient. And we've moved the needle. We're one of a handful of states that actually have seen a narrowing of the achievement gap. This required hard work and incredible dedication of teachers, but it also required challenging a system that if you don't challenge, will ossify and never change. So my admonition to you is if you want to assure sustained economic growth and prosperity for yourself, your kids, and most particularly your grandkids, we need to transform our education system before it's too late. I don't think reform in and of itself is enough. I think we need to transform it, envision a different way of doing things, and then act with passion and conviction to make that reality come true. That means rewarding teachers in a different way. Longevity of service, job protection just based on showing up should be secondary to rewarding great teachers when they consistently provide learning gains in the classrooms where their students come in. Do it faithfully, do it the right way. It means having the courage to raise academic standards to the best in the world. Florida's fourth graders, by the way, recently took a test. I don't remember what the acronym is called, but it's an international test. For some reason, someone inside the Department of Education decided to pay for additional kids to take this test in Florida so that it could be treated as though it was a nation. In fourth grade reading on this test, I think it's administered by the OECD, Florida came in second in the world, only behind Hong Kong, ahead of countries that are people say we must emulate, like Korea and Finland and all the rest of the world. We can do this, but we have to have a sustained effort, and rewarding teachers for a job well done is part of that. And the second thing is we have to have high, lofty expectations and not back down. It's going to be ugly when we have Common Core standards implemented and we see the results in the first year. It won't be pretty because it shouldn't be pretty. We're not cutting it yet, but we can do better if we start with high expectations instead of excusing away why it's not fair and all the things that I know will happen in the state, because I've got tire marks on my forehead hearing people in cars, back up and hit me in the head over and over again when we tried to change a system that was reluctant to change. And then finally, I would suggest to you that we need to move to a competency-based learning system where children learn in their own way, in their own pace, but they learn to the maximum of their God-given abilities. And that's done through the crazy thing called digital learning. Content, the best in the world content brought into the classroom, where teachers then manage the learning experience and envision a classroom where where students are not held back if they've already mastered the material. They move on to the more demanding work, and where kids that are struggling are given the attention they deserve, and they're not pushed along. Where we just kind of go to the median and not really get the kind of results we want. Ultimately, we could get to a place where children learn in their age group with dramatically different outcomes, but I guarantee you one thing, we won't have 2/3 of our kids not college or career ready if we did it the right way. And we would have children that would excel way beyond a high school degree by the time they finished 12th grade. And this state, if we did it first, would be the envy not only of the United States of America, but the envy of the world. So, I'll conclude with a comment about leadership. These things are hard to do. It shouldn't be. I mean, I look at this stuff and I go, who can be against this? I mean, I don't think this is necessarily a liberal deal or a conservative deal. I'm a conservative, but I mean, if you forced people to have a position on this, if you crafted it the right way, you could create a high-growth strategy where there was buy-in across the ideological spectrum. In fact, it almost is necessary to do that given the heightened political climate that we have today. So what's remaining, what's the catalyst to get us where we need to be? And there's other things that we have to do as well. This is not, these three things alone won't solve the world's problems. But we need leadership. We need public leadership. I've been so troubled seeing from afar the lack of people willing to take risks in the political domain these days. It's quite troubling. I mean, when I was governor, a lot of people didn't like me personally. They let me know that occasionally. A lot of people didn't like what I did. But by and large, by the end of my tenure, people would say, hey, I didn't like what you did, comma, but I knew where you stood. But I knew where you were trying to take us. But you were crazy, but you had fortitude, whatever the term might be. And that seems to be lacking today. And so I've gone back and done what I do when I'm confounded by current events, and I read. I just read the 3rd volume of Lyndon Johnson's book, the book on Lyndon Johnson by Cairo. The guy's basically given his entire adult life covering a very complex man, Lyndon Johnson. And in a 6-week period, in a time of great crisis for our country, incredible crisis, the assassination of a charismatic president, in 6 weeks' time, a guy who was flawed in many ways, complex beyond belief, who was relegated kind of to the dust heap of history. The most powerful man in Washington was called cornpone by the new team that came in. He helped John Kennedy get elected by carrying places like Texas and other places that President Kennedy would have a hard time to win. Immediately thereafter, he was put aside and marginalized, a proud man treated poorly, and I'll leave it at that. And what did he do? The first thing he did was show the humility of a leader by asking, begging, pleading the Kennedy team to stay intact, because he knew that his agenda would not go anywhere unless they were there. Because if he divided this in a way, he would lose the popular support in the country, and certainly the possibilities would be diminished of getting big things done in the Senate. Then he did something that President Kennedy didn't do very well. It's not done very often in Washington these days. He went and he cajoled, he begged, he threatened, he loved, he hugged. He did what leaders do, which is they personally get engaged to make something happen. And what that was? A 25% across-the-board cut in income taxes. For the life of me, I've been a Republican most of all my adult life, and there's no news there. I've been a Republican. And I always use the Kennedy tax cuts as a basis to kind of show that Republicans aren't the only ones that believe in tax cuts. When in fact, in reading this book, it turns out that was Lyndon Johnson. In the first 2 weeks of his efforts, he got a 25% across-the-board cut in taxes done. He did it because he wanted to generate revenue to begin the Great Society programs. Imagine a president of the United States today that would envision cutting taxes to create economic activity that would generate revenue to begin to deal with the challenges a lot of people struggling to make ends meet would need. A girl can dream. After he got that done, Johnson then moves to do something he didn't want to do. But in order to get the ultimate thing done, he had to convince Senator Byrd, who was a dominant figure in the United States Senate, a proud man, kind of in his decline. He showed, again, the leadership to be able to pay homage to him in the way that mattered most, which was to submit a budget that was dollar for dollar and lower than the previous year. Trust me, Lyndon Johnson was a New Deal Democrat. That was not his version of the role of government, but he did that because it was important to show respect for someone who could have opposed everything else that he wanted to do. He showed respect. Leaders show respect to people that don't agree with them. It's a novel idea. It's been part of our history consistently in this country, and now it seems to have gone away. And the net result was that he got the Kennedy secretaries of these departments that also opposed doing this. He made them do it. He submitted to the Congress and to Senator Byrd to show respect. A budget that was a year-to-year decline, not a cut in the growth like we talk about now with this new budgeting rigmarole that we have, but real decline in the budget, the first time since World War II. And then, at the end of a 6-week period, he got the most significant civil rights legislation passed in the United States history. 6 weeks' time, a man that history will say was flawed in many ways, showed the kind of leadership, the personal engagement, that made it possible for huge things to happen. Today, I saw someone, an unnamed person in the White House about a month ago, say, you know, Lincoln would have had a hard time in the climate that we're in Washington today, with the Republicans being so intractable. Really? That you're comparing what we have today to a civil war? Really? We have gone through huge challenges as a country. And we've overcome them. And the one key ingredient, irrespective of who that person was or what their party affiliation was that someone decided that they were going to lead, that they were going to change the dynamic, they were going to change the paradigm, they were going to move in a completely different direction. That's what we need. If we want to create sustained economic growth, we want to create a more bipartisan America that allows us to restore our greatness, to allow for the next generation to be successful, we need leadership. And I hope that you'll demand it and that you'll urge it. And God bless you all. Thanks for allowing me to come.